there's the gentleman that almost always introduces our speaker. And he's going to do that today, and he's eminently qualified to introduce our speaker today. John?
This is me.
All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Today's speaker, me. So my name is Jon Feins. For those of you who don't know me, I've been a Pelican Bay speaker. I've been a Pelican Bay resident for over 15 years. I moved from New Hampshire to Naples in 2006 with my wife and 4 kids. And I'm on the men's coffee board, and I usually introduce the speakers here each week. And if you still don't know me, you've probably at least gotten a few emails from me because I send out the men's coffee newsletter that tells which speakers are coming up. I'm currently a real estate agent with Compass. I'm the principal agent of a 9-person real estate team, the Feins Group. In the past 12 months, my team did over $100 million in sales. We were in the top 2% of Compass teams nationwide. It was an especially busy year for real estate here in Naples. That's what I'm going to talk about today. Before I got into real estate, I owned a medical billing company up in New England. My wife and I started it together in 1990, and by the time I sold it in 2005, we had expanded to serving physicians and hospitals in 7 states. Before that, I was an options spread broker and trader on the New York Stock Exchange, American Stock Exchange, and the Chicago Board Options Exchange. When I worked on Wall Street, I added, subtracted, multiplied fractions in my head 8 hours a day for about 10 years. So I'm a numbers guy. So we're going to talk about real estate numbers in Pelican Bay.
Baby, I'm crazy. Baby, you're crazy.
Okay, everybody awake now? It's a crazy market out there. And all I hear from other agents and customers over and over again is this is crazy. Recently, a men's coffee attendee asked me if we were in a real estate bubble. We all know there have been many boom and bust periods in real estate during our lifetimes. Most recently, there was the 2007 financial crisis. The question on everyone's mind is, when are we going to bust? How long can this real estate boom last? Who the heck knows? Everyone wants to try to time the market, and every time there's a boom, people say, this time, it's different. I'm going to give you some things to think about today that are going to help you understand this time a little bit better. The number one question I get from people when they first meet me is, how is the market doing? There's a simple calculation we can use to figure out how the market's doing, and I'm going to teach it to you right now. It's called the absorption rate. And it tells us how long the average property is going to sit on the market before somebody buys it. We calculate the absorption rate by taking the number of properties that are actively on the market right now. We divide those active properties by the number of properties that have sold in the past year. And then we multiply that by 12. So we've got the actives divided by the solds times 12 equals the absorption rate. So right now, if we plug in the numbers for Pelican Bay, we have 18 properties that are actively on the market right now. 577 that sold in the past 12 months. And we divide that by 12. The average home will only be on the market for about 1/3 of a month, or 11 days. I was a men's coffee speaker exactly 2 years ago, right before COVID hit. And I talked about the absorption rates in that presentation. I want to show you what that calculation looked like back then compared to now. So 2 years ago, there were 244 active properties, 308 that had sold in the past year, and the average Pelican Bay house would sit on the market for over 9 months. Today, it's only 11 days. It's definitely a crazy market. So you've probably heard terms like buyer's market or seller's market. And there are general guidelines for how we determine what kind of market we're in. It's considered a seller's market if the absorption rate is below 5 months. It's a balanced market if it's 6 or 7 months. And it's a buyer's market if we're over 8 months. Back in 2020, right before the pandemic, we were in a buyer's market. Right now, unquestionably a seller's market. We've seen a huge shift in the past 2 years. So what happened? We've run into a supply and demand problem that actually dates back all the way to 2007. During the financial crisis, nobody was buying houses. Since there was no demand, all the builders stopped building. Even though they stopped making houses, they didn't stop making people. The population kept growing, and people needed places to live. So by the time the real estate market bounced back right around 2012, the builders were overwhelmed with demand, and they've been playing catch-up ever since. Then, don't know if you know about it, but we've got a little pandemic going on right now. The pandemic has caused a lot of issues that have disrupted the building industry. Remember that at the very beginning of COVID, if one person on a job site got sick, the whole operation had to shut down for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, non-essential businesses were closing right and left. Plus, there were delays with shipping companies, and we ran into supply chain issues. This is a huge problem for the building industry. The supply chain itself is a lot more fragile and complicated than people realize. A lot of the products that we use every day had to travel the world before they came to us. Smartphones, for instance. The pieces of your smartphone were made in South Korea, shipped to China, assembled in China, and then shipped to America. And everything's like that. The chairs and tables in this room, this podium, it was all made somewhere else, usually multiple other places. So if any part of the journey has a delay, it holds up everything else. One single factory in Asia shutting down for COVID will directly impact the Apple store at the waterside shops. This is a New York Times article that came out last week called "A Normal Supply Chain. It's Unlikely in 2022." It does a great job of explaining what's going on right now with the supply chain. So at the beginning of the pandemic, the assumption was that lockdowns and layoffs would make people stop spending and cause another financial crisis. Shipping companies remembered back in 2007, the American economy took years to bounce back. And back then, people weren't spending very much. And because they weren't buying anything, there wasn't much to ship. So the shipping companies had no business and they made no money. So right at the beginning of 2020, the shipping companies assumed we were heading for another period of no spending, and they decided this time we're going to partially shut down and try to save money on overhead costs. They laid off a lot of people and reduced service. That was a really, really bad idea. Because in reality, spending didn't stop, it just shifted. People couldn't go to the gym, so they started buying treadmills for their houses. They couldn't go to work, so they bought desks and chairs for their bedrooms. The restaurants are closed, buy a mixer for the kitchen. The demand for things to be shipped actually skyrocketed. And the shipping industry just wasn't prepared, so they started scrambling. Demand for shipping is so high right now that the ports are overwhelmed. This is a port in Los Angeles. It's completely full. The cargo ships have used up every available anchored spot. The new ships are being told just to drift around freely while they wait for space to open up. These ships are basically becoming floating warehouses. They're not actively delivering anything. They're just taking up space and waiting. The price to ship something in one of these shipping containers before the pandemic was about $2,500. Last year it was $7,000, and that number is growing. And it gets even worse because normally what happens is a shipping container lands in a port, unloads its cargo, and then gets loaded up with new cargo before it goes off to the next port. But right now, these containers are in such high demand that they aren't bothering to wait around to get loaded back up. They unload, then zip off to the next location, usually wherever they can find the highest bidder. So if you own a company that exports things overseas, you better be the highest bidder, or your products aren't leaving that shipyard. And if you can't afford to be the highest bidder, you've got two choices. You you go out of business, or you raise your price of goods and pass it off to the customer. That's why we're seeing big shortages and price hikes all over the place on every kind of product. So among the products that have been impacted by the supply chain issues are building materials. Lumber, windows, doors, cabinetry, appliances, furniture. These things all have components that were made overseas, and we're seeing major shortages and price increases on these items. And because of this, the building companies have severely limited how many homes they're willing to work on. I'm going to give you a real-world example. There's a community in Naples called Esplanade by the Islands. It's down near Marco Island. They're planning on building 1,250 homes in there. And normally, if you wanted to purchase a new construction home in a community like that, you take a tour of their models, you decided which lot you would want in the community, and then you pick out your finishes in the design center. You buy the home before they've even broken ground. However, with all the supply chain issues, it's possible that you might buy a home today, and then in 2 or 3 months, when they're ready to start building, all of the supplies to build that home have doubled or tripled in price. If that happens, the builders lose money, and they don't want to take that risk. So the companies that used to take contracts for 20 or 30 homes at a time are suddenly limiting themselves. In Esplanade by the Island specifically, they have 4 salespeople. Each salesperson is capped at 2 sales per month. No design options can be customized. The builder selects everything for the house based on what's available. So if you're trying to build 1,250 homes, but you're only doing 8 per month, it's going to be 13 years before you're done. It's mind-blowingly slow. And it's no wonder that they can't catch up on demand. Another major consequence of the pandemic is that offices shifted to a work-from-home model. Suddenly, you didn't need to live in the same city where you work. So let's take a poll. If you're at work, would you rather look out your window and see this? Or this? It's a no-brainer. So millions of people who now have the flexibility to live anywhere in the world are heading down here because of the nicer weather. There's also people who are planning to move to Florida when they retired anyway, and they're just moving up the timeline and retiring earlier than planned. Another thing that happens during an economic boom is that investors get involved. A lot of real estate investing companies like Zillow have been buying up houses, sometimes even overpaying for them, and renting them out at really high prices. So people who would normally be renters are looking at their monthly bill and realizing that it would be cheaper to have a mortgage. They start looking at buying a home. So that's even more demand flooding into the market. Now there's a lot of things that make Naples in particular a really attractive place to move. The weather is a huge one. Florida has no state income tax. So if you're from a high-tax state like New York or Massachusetts, and you can keep the same job, work remotely, and become a Florida resident, you're going to save a fair amount in taxes. Florida doesn't have a lot of COVID restrictions or mandates. Some people see this as a negative. Others move here specifically because they aren't happy with the policies in their home states. Florida also has one of the best, if not the best, homesteading laws in the country. I'm going to get to that in a little bit. This is an article that came out 2 weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal. It specifically names Naples as the #1 place people are moving to right now. Naples, Florida was the top-ranked market for this quarter. And that's in the whole country, not just Florida. Sales in Naples in 2021 rose 26% from a year earlier. The median home sale price for the year rose 20% to $445,000. Now obviously, Pelican Bay, we're looking at much higher numbers than that, but 20% is a huge increase. This is the Wall Street Journal Emerging Housing Markets Index for 2022. Naples is at the top. Fort Myers, Cape Coral, Northport, Sarasota, Bradenton also made the list. Just about the entire southwest Florida coast is included here. So with all these people moving to Naples, you'd think we'd be seeing a lot of sales right now. but it's actually the opposite. We've run out of inventory, and the builders aren't creating new property fast enough. This graph shows the number of home sales in Pelican Bay. The gold bars are 2020, and the blue line is 2021. So if you follow the blue line, we have a huge number of sales at the beginning of 2021. And then right around July, that line dips down to the lowest number of the year. That's the point where the supply is finally used up. Now the housing shortage is nationwide. When you go to Publix, the shortage of food throughout the store. Naples is the aisle with the toilet paper and the paper towels. It's a hot commodity. People know it's scarce, so they try to buy it all up, which makes it even more scarce, which makes people want it even more. The supply just can't keep up with the demand. So what happens when there's no supply, but a high demand? The prices go up. This graph shows the average sale price of a home in Pelican Bay. The 2020 data is gold, and the 2021 data is blue. If you look at July, which is when the inventory dropped, you'll see that the average price of a property in Pelican Bay was much higher than the previous July, and the prices keep climbing. Look at September 2020. The average Pelican Bay property cost about $1.25 million. 1 year later, the average price was $2.5 million. Now what starts to happen, and I've seen this with my own customers, is that people will look at dozens of property, they'll find one they love, they'll make an offer, and they get outbid. So they have to start all over again. Looking for a home can be a really emotional process. After losing out on a house twice or 3 times or 4 times, people get really frustrated and they start feeling desperate. So they start to put in aggressive offers. They say, we know we're overpaying, but we don't care. We just want to be done looking. Sometimes they make offers even before they view the property. And the sellers, if they're paying attention to the market, they know how desperate the buyers are, so they start pricing their properties higher and higher, and it all escalates. So now we understand how we got here. Let's talk about what's going to happen next. Now obviously I don't know the future, but I can make a few good guesses. The biggest question on everyone's mind is how long is this boom going to last? When it comes to this particular boom, I actually still think we're closer to the beginning than the end. And the reason is there's a big transfer of wealth coming. If you look at the ages of people in America, the oldest generation are the silent generation and the baby boomers. Born between 1928 and 1964, and that's most of you in here. These are the people who grew up during or right after the Great Depression. And because of that, they're very good savers. They don't spend money on unnecessary things. So over their lifetime, they've amassed large amounts of wealth. When that generation dies, they're going to leave that wealth to their kids. The younger generation are going to have no problem spending mom and dad's inheritance. They were brought up in a different world, and they have different values about money. It's estimated in the next 20 years, over $68 trillion is going to transfer from the older generations to the younger, mostly tax-free. And what do you think that younger generation is going to do with it? They're probably going to buy a nice vacation home or 2. What I don't think is going to happen is a repeat of 2007. The real estate market collapsed in 2007 because people were buying property they couldn't afford. Back then, if your middle name was Steve, you could go into a bank, get a mortgage, no questions asked. After 2007, banks made significant changes to their underwriting policies. They got rid of the no money down mortgage, they implemented credit checks, they started doing income verification to make sure you had a job and could afford to do this. So all the people buying homes right now are either paying cash or getting much safer mortgages. 9 out of 10 of my customers are cash buyers. We're not going to see another mass foreclosure incident like we did last time. So if you're someone who just came into a lot of money and you're looking to buy a property in cash, Florida has one huge tax advantage that makes it a very attractive place to live: our homestead laws. Florida has one of the strongest homestead laws in the country. There's two parts to the homestead advantage: the law and the tax exemption. The Florida homestead law protects a Florida's resident's primary home from creditors. This means that if you get sued or you declare bankruptcy, nobody can force you to sell your house in order to pay off that debt. There are very, very few exceptions to this. And Florida designed the law purposely to try to entice more people to move here way back when there wasn't an inventory problem. As long as you're a permanent Florida resident, you automatically get this protection without having to do anything. The law protects unlimited amounts of value. The law protects unlimited amounts of value, and you get this protection without having to do anything. There's other states that have homestead protection, but Florida is one of only 7 states that protect unlimited amounts of the value. This only applies to your primary residence. So if you're a snowbird, your Pelican Bay place is only protected if it's your primary residence. There we go. O.J. Simpson moved to Florida because of the homestead law. He had a $30 million civil verdict entered against him in California over the death of Nicole Brown Simpson. He didn't want to pay it, so he moved to Florida, bought a mansion, which made all that money untouchable. Donald Trump did a similar thing in 2019 when he made his Palm Beach property, Mar-a-Lago, his primary residence. He's trying to protect his assets. The second part of the homestead advantage is the tax benefit you receive by becoming a permanent resident. One thing I want to stress is that you can make your property your primary residence even if you're only down here 2 or 3 months a year. Florida has no income tax or inheritance tax, so they don't care how much time you spend here. Now, if you own property in another state that does have an income tax, they care. They want your tax dollars. Typically, you would need to be out of that state for 6 months plus a day per year, and you also can't claim any homestead exemption that state may offer. Here are the homestead requirements to make yourself a permanent resident. You need to have a Florida's driver's license. Your car must be registered in Florida. You need to be voting in Florida. You should have a bank account in Florida. This one seems a little silly, but you got to cover all your bases. There have been cases in the past where courts have ruled against homeowners who are trying to claim this benefit just because they were doing their banking through a different state or having their mail sent to a different state. You also want to be filing your federal income tax using your Florida address. So once you've established you're a permanent Florida resident, the tax benefit itself has to do with your property taxes. So if we take the price of your house, we multiply it by 1%, that's roughly what you'll pay in taxes. And when I say the price of your house, I'm talking about the price, I'm not talking about the price you paid for your house. I'm talking about what the property appraiser's office thinks your home is worth, your assessed value. The way they get to that assessed value is using an algorithm. It's all automated. It looks at the homes in your neighborhood that sold in the past year, and it sort of averages them together to figure out how much your house is worth. If you have a neighbor that sells their house for way more than it's worth, the algorithm is going to assume every house on your street has increased in value. So you're going to see a spike in your assessed value. Or if your neighbor says, I need to sell my house immediately, I'm going to price it really low, and they sell it for way less than it's worth, the value of your property may go down as well. Frankly, it's not a very accurate system. And you are able to call up the property appraiser's office to dispute the assessment value if you want. So let's plug in some numbers. Let's pretend you own a property and the algorithm assesses your property at $1 million. $1 million times 1% is $10,000, so that's your property tax. Now let's say 10 people in your community sell their homes for huge numbers. And it's so huge that the algorithm doubles the value of your home to $2 million. This is also going to double your property taxes. 1% of $2 million is $20,000, but not so fast. If you're homesteaded, meaning if you're a permanent resident of Florida and you jump through all the hoops with your driver's license and car registration and everything, the tax gets capped. The property tax cannot rise more than 3% per year. So if we take last year's $10,000 tax, we multiply it by 3%, we get $300. That means if your house value doubles, the most your property taxes can go up is $300. And next year, if it doubles again, your taxes still can only go up 3% of what you paid last year. So in our imaginary scenario here, you're saving almost $30,000 in taxes just by becoming a permanent Florida resident. And sometimes your taxes don't even go up the full 3%. The law states that the annual increase shall not exceed 3% of the assessed value of the property for the prior year, or the percentage change in the consumer price index, whichever is lower. The consumer price index, or the CPI, is basically how the government measures buying power and inflation. For 2022, the CPI went up 7%. That's higher than 3%, so for 2022, if you're homesteading, your taxes are going to increase by 3%. However, looking at the past several years, the CPI in 2021 was only up 1.4%. That's lower than the 3%. So because the CPI was lower, your taxes last year only went up 1.4%. And it's rare for the CPI to hit that 3% number. The last time it happened was 10 years ago, in 2012. It only happened 7 times since the Save Our Homes policy was created in 1995. So people who are homesteaded are actually saving even more than it seems. There's one more thing about homesteading that's really great. Portability. I know we've been kind of number heavy the past few slides. This section's going to get worse. I know not everybody's a number guy like me, so if any of it goes over your head, come find me after the meeting, anytime. I'd love to sit down and go over it with you. It's not something I charge for or anything. It's just a really cool thing that I figured out, and I get excited to share it with people. The reason you should care about this is that you can actually save money in taxes by raising the assessed value of your house. Sounds really crazy. A higher priced house sounds like it comes with higher taxes. But there's a way you can use the homestead to both raise the assessed value and lower your taxes at the same time. I tested this out on my own home, and I helped my neighbor do it, and it worked. So portability basically means that if you sell your home and buy a new one, you can take your Save Our Home savings with you as long as the new home is somewhere in the state of Florida. Let's go back to our example of the $1 million house that doubled to $2 million. We should be paying $20,000 in property tax, but because of our homestead, we're only paying $10,300. Remember that the formula for property tax is 1% of the assessed value on the home. So if someone with no homestead advantage is paying $10,000 in property taxes, we can divide each side of the equation by 1% and figure out that their home is worth $1,030,000. So if we're living in a house that's worth $2 million, but we're paying tax like someone who lives in a house that's worth only $1,030,000, that means there's a portion of the house we're not paying taxes on. $970,000 of our house is completely tax-free. Sometimes a picture makes it a little more clear what's going on. Here's our house assessed at $2 million. That $970,000 that isn't taxed is considered our savings. If you decided to sell this house and buy a new primary residence in Florida, that $970,000 savings comes with you. It's portable. So when you settle into your new $2 million house, and you're still only paying $10,300 in taxes, You don't have to start over again because you bought a new place. They honor the old rate you were paying. Now, it's not quite that straightforward, and there's a couple of rules about portable savings. The biggest one is that the portable amount is capped at $500,000. So in our example, you actually can't take the full $970,000 with you. You can only bring $500,000. But that portable amount is also variable. Let's pretend instead of buying a new house for $2 million, you downsized and bought a smaller place for $1 million instead. This house is worth half the price of the first house. So guess what? The $970,000 in savings gets divided in half. And you'll notice that the new savings number, $485,000, is less than the $500,000 cap. So you get to bring that whole thing with you over to the new house. So here's our $1 million house with $485,000 savings. But wouldn't it have been nice if we could have hit that $500,000 cap and maximize that savings? We were so close, just $15,000 short. There is a way to increase the savings, but we have to do it before we buy the new place. Remember how I told you the algorithm can be kind of inaccurate? You can call up the Collier County Appraiser's Office and dispute your assessed values. Now, people usually do this to try to lower their assessed value because they want their property taxes to go down. What I'm suggesting is that you ask them to raise your property taxes. If you call up the property appraiser's office and get that $2 million number raised to $2.5 million, in theory, your taxes go up $5,000. But they can't, because they're capped at 3%. Your taxes will not change no matter how high your value is. They're not allowed to. They're fixed based on last year's taxes. This year's assessed value will never impact last year's taxes. And if last year's taxes aren't changing, this year's aren't changing. So here's our $2.5 million house. We still are paying taxes on $1,030,000 of it, just like before. Our taxes didn't change. What did change is our savings. And that's a huge savings number. So now let's sell our $2.5 million house and buy something for $1 million. So now instead of dividing in half, we're dividing by 2.5. When we divide our savings by 2.5, what we get to take with us is $588,000, which is well over the $500,000 cap. So now on our new home, instead of this, we're getting the full $500,000 advantage promised by law. So you can see how we benefit from raising the assessed value of our home without affecting our taxes whatsoever. Now this is huge if you're thinking about selling your Pelican Bay place and downsizing. Come talk to me before you do something like this and I can show you exactly how to do it. It's very little effort, but it's so worth it. Just to show you how it really works, I tested this theory on my own home. My original 2021 tax notice had my assessed value at $1.5 million, and the amount I was being taxed on was $989,000. So my little picture looked like this, with $512,000 in tax savings. I called up and disputed my assessed value. I explained that Pelican Bay is a hot market, I did renovations, and I believed my house was worth more than they had it assessed for. They changed my assessed value to $2.1 million, up $600,000. My taxes stayed the same. So my little picture update, I went from $512,000 in savings to over $1 million. I didn't have to pay any more in taxes. All I had to do was make a phone call. And now, if I ever want to downsize, I can get something for half the value and still bring the full allowable $500,000 savings with me. Whew. That was kind of dead stuff. If you zoned out, because you're not a numbers guy, now you can zone back in. I mentioned that I previously spoke at Men's Coffee 2 years ago, right when COVID was getting started. I wanted to share a quick clip from that talk.
What are your thoughts on where the market is going in the next 2 years?
Real estate, I think a lot of it too depends on what's going to happen in the economy. Even this coronavirus thing, I don't know how many people we get. If that number goes to 2 million, and the stock market drops 6,000 points, people aren't going to buy houses, especially in the higher end. 2 days after I gave that talk, the stock market started to free fall and ended 10,000 points down in less than a month. So at least I had the right idea about that. I was a little off the mark on whether people would keep buying real estate. So the point is, even people who know what they're talking about can't predict what's going to happen with the economy, with real estate, any of it. So if you're hoping to time the market with your real estate purchases and sales, the best advice I can give is don't try to time the market. So I know I've covered a lot of information this morning. Here's a recap of everything that I talked about to jog your memory. If you're interested, I brought handouts with tons of graphs and data about what's going on in Pelican Bay real estate. You can take one on the way out. And at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions.